So now that we've covered how to digitize our geofilter in Adobe Illustrator, let's cover how you can digitize your geofilter in Adobe Photoshop. And so we have our geofilter sketch on our desktop. So what we're going to do is then go over to Adobe Photoshop, and then we could go to File, New, and then from here we can set the document settings, and the width should be at 1080 pixels, the height should be 1920 pixels, and the resolution should be 300 pixels per inch. And then we have the color mode be RGB color. And just make sure that the background contents is transparent rather than it being white or a background color. So once you have those settings, you can then go ahead and select OK. And then you should have your new document. And you want to first import your image of the sketch. So you go to File, and then Place Embedded, and find that image, and then select Place. Now you can drag that image to the desired location, and once you find it, you could then go ahead and double click on it to place it. And once we placed our image, we can go over to the Layers panel, and if you don't happen to see it, you can go to Window and then select Layers, and we can see that the first layer is called Sketch. So what we can then do is place a new layer by clicking the new layer icon, and this will go ahead and create a new layer on top of the sketch layer. And from there we can go ahead and select the pen tool from the toolbar on the left by clicking either the icon, or you could press P on your keyboard. So then we could zoom in a little bit on the sketch itself. Now the pen tool still works the same by placing anchor points and then adjusting the Bezier curves in order to smooth out those transitions. However, in Photoshop, you are essentially creating invisible paths or shapes first and then filling them in later. Now, unlike Adobe Illustrator, you can't go back and edit the paths after you fill in the design because these fills are going to be permanent. The only way to make changes to the path after you fill it in is to delete the fill and then edit the path and then fill it in again. So as you can see, it may take a little bit more time to get everything right, and if you have to edit anything, it's going to take a little bit longer. So to demonstrate, let's go ahead and draw the path for this S, and we can do that by clicking to create those anchor points at every change in direction or at the extremities of some curves until we go all the way back around and complete the shape where we started it. Now if we zoom in, and then go to the pen tool icon, click and hold on it, and grab the convert point tool. Now go ahead and click and drag on the points in order to bring out those Bezier curves and those handles, and do that all the way around until you complete your shape. Remember to drag the point out until it completes 50% of that curve, and then let the neighboring anchor point take on the other 50% of that curve in order to have both complete it for 100% of that curve. So as you can see, it's not showing any fill or stroke to the path, and that's because we need to fill it. So if we go to Window and then go to Paths, this Paths panel will show up on the right side, and this is the path we just drew. And in order to fill it, we can right click on it and click Fill Path. Now you can choose you could either choose foreground color, which right now mine is green, and you could either choose background color, which right now mine is black. However, I want this to be white, so I'm going to click color and then just drag this to white, click OK, and then everything else looks pretty good, so we're going to click OK. And that's our design because that's where the path was. Now, if I go and try to click this path and try to adjust this anchor point, you can see that the white is not following it like it was in Adobe Illustrator. And this is because we just filled this with white, and in order to change it, we have to delete it. And we can delete this fill by first clicking off of the path to deselect it, then going to the layers panel, and you don't want to delete the sketch layer, so we can either toggle off the visibility or go up here and select the lock icon to lock this layer so we don't delete anything. And then we could select layer 1, which has the white fill, and then you want to select all. And you can do this with the keyboard shortcut Command or Control A to select all, and then select delete. And that will delete your white path that you originally did. And then you can go back over to the paths panel and select that path again, and you could either right click on it to fill that path and then choose your color, or there's a button at the bottom that is a quicker way to fill the path with a foreground color. Now I'm going to change my foreground color to white and then press that button, and you can see that it created a new fill with our new path that we fixed. So because you have to delete the fill every time you make an edit to the path, it's best just to create all the paths first of all your elements or letters, and then fill it in once you have finished creating all those paths. Other than that, the pen tool works pretty much exactly the same as the pen tool in Adobe Illustrator, so I'm not going to go into too much detail of how to use the pen tool here. So if you have any questions of how to actually use the pen tool, just revisit the previous lesson since I cover it in detail there. So I just finished up drawing all the paths with the pen tool for all the shapes I have in my sketch. And just to keep in mind when you're doing this, to make a new path by going to the new path icon in the paths panel, for every shape that is going to be different and is going to be separate from the others. For example, you don't want any shapes that are intersecting, otherwise it's going to show a blank spot when you go to fill it in. But if they are going to be intersecting and they're different shapes, you just want to make sure that they're on different paths. So each one of these is a different letter, and I like to do that just because I want to be able to edit the specific letter without changing much of anything else. For example, these two strokes on the A, for example this one and then this one, are touching each other, so they're overlapping each other. You want them to be on separate paths rather than on the same one. Otherwise, this intersection will actually show up as a blank spot. So you don't want that. You want them to appear like they're connected. So you will need to do them separately or create them separately on different paths. And how you can do that is you can go to the paths panel, and at the bottom just create a new path with this icon and then start drawing that path on a new path layer. So as you can see, I have several paths because I have several different shapes with different letters that are potentially overlapping, so I just separated them out into new paths. So now I can go ahead and click on the path and then fill it with the foreground color on each one of these. So as you can see, it's a little rough, but for this example, I'm just going to keep it as is. But if you wanted to change anything, you would again have to go to the layers, and from there you would select layer 1, and you would then hit Command or Control A on the keyboard to select all, and then select delete, and that will delete it. And then you could go back to your paths, edit the path, and then refill it with the foreground color. However, let's say that I went back and edited all those paths and I feel good about it. So let's go back to that one. And we're on the first layer. We could then toggle off the sketch layer since we no longer need it. And from here, if you wanted to create a drop shadow, you can go to the layers panel, and at the bottom you can see the FX icon for effects, and then you could click that, and then at the very bottom it should say drop shadow, and you could click that. And now if you move this panel, you should be able to see a preview, and then you can control the opacity of it by clicking this slider and then just sliding it back and forth. And you could control the distance, spread, and size. And once you feel good about it, you can click OK. And if for some reason you didn't want that drop shadow anymore, you can go to the layers panel and then just toggle off the effects or the drop shadow. And now if you wanted to create a border on the paths you just created, you can go back to the paths panel. What we're going to need to do is to copy all the paths that you created by clicking on the first one, going to the last one, and then holding down Shift and then clicking the last path that you have. And this will select all the paths that you have. And then you want to copy those and then select a new path, and then you can go ahead and go to edit and then paste, and this is going to create a whole new path with all the paths on one path. So then what you can do is go up to the top menu bar, and you can see this icon that says it has an icon of two squares overlapping, and what you want to do is select the one that says combine shapes. And so this should create a complete shape that you can use. And what you can then do is go to edit and then stroke, and then select a width for the stroke, and then make sure that the location is on the outside, and then click OK. And now after we deselect it, we can see that we have the border around the text, and we have a lot of trapped white space. So what we can do now is then go to the paintbrush tool, and you could then fill in those trapped white space areas in order to make it a little bit more appealing to the eye. So now you can tell we have a border as well as the filled in white space areas, so it looks more like a background rather than just a stroke. As you can tell, this is still pretty rough, and this is because I chose not to spend too much time on this, just because it's going to be very difficult to do these sort of freeform shapes with the pen tool inside of Adobe Photoshop without spending hours and hours trying to get it right. And this is a task meant more for Adobe Illustrator, just because it's very easy to edit those anchor points and Bezier curves if you need to edit anything without deleting the fill and refilling it. However, I thought I should share how you can do the same sort of thing within Photoshop. If for some reason you can't get Adobe Illustrator, it's just going to take you a lot longer to get it just right to where it's acceptable to submit. Now, if you had any geometric shapes inside your design rather than freeform, you can go over to the Tools panel and then select the rectangle box icon. And this will be the rectangle tool. You will then click and drag to create a rectangle, and on the right side the properties panel will pop up, and here will be the dimensions as well as all the details for any of the shapes you can create. And this will have the width, the height, and then it'll have the X and Y axis, and then it can also have the fill and the stroke color as well as the stroke size. So you can change the fill color, and you can do that with the stroke as well if you'd like, or you can get rid of the stroke. But this is where all the details will be for your shapes. Now if you had other shapes like an ellipse, you can go to the ellipse tool right under the rectangle tool, and then you can click and drag to create that ellipse, change the color of that, and you will have a different shape. And anything you need to change will be in the properties panel, which you can expand or close whenever you want. So now that you know how to create those geometric shapes, we will cover how you can add the text, which is in the left. You have the text icon with the T, and then you could click and drag to create a text box, and it will have your fonts and your sizes at the very top. You can select a different typeface and different size and a different style, and then you could go ahead and test it out by typing out your text. Let's say we want to change the color to a white, and then you can click and drag this box on top of your backgrounds or wherever you want it, and then you could just deselect it, and that's how it'd be. So that's how you can add text, and as well as those basic geometric shapes, and as well as changing those basic colors and all those other details. So I'm going to get rid of that test and those boxes and the circle. And then let's just say that I want to keep this as my final geofilter. So we'll just zoom back out, and let's say we want to move it around. We can go onto the first layer. We can actually select the first and second layer in the layers panel, and then have your move icon or the move tool, which is V on the keyboard, or you could just select it from the toolbox on the left, and then you could just move around wherever you like. And if you want to also change the size of it, you can go to Edit in the menu bar, go to Free Transform, and then you can scale it up and down. But however, don't do this where it's stretching the geofilter. What you want to do is whenever you're changing the size, you want to hold down the Shift button. And if you want to change it by keeping it in the center, you can hold down Shift and the Option or Alt button on your keyboard, and it will shift from the center out. And once you find a good spot, you can let go. Now again, even if you drag from the top, it's still going to distort it, even if you're holding down the Shift button. So you don't want to drag from the top or the sides. You want to drag from the corners and hold down Shift and the Alt or Option button. And this will drag it proportionately and scale it so it doesn't get out of shape, which is something that is not going to be good for the geofilter. So once you have a good size you want and you have it positioned well, you can then double click to position it, and then what you can do is then go to File, Save, and just save this document as your geofilter document. And then you want to export it as a PNG. So we go to File, Export, and then Export As. And this will be our geofilter file. And we have the width of 1080 with the height of 1920 and a PNG as the format with transparency. You want to see that there is the checkerboards background, just because that's going to be an indication that is a transparent background. If it's white, then you need to make sure that there's no layer on in your layers panel that is white, and you want to make sure that this transparency is selected. If it's not selected, it will probably look like this. So just make sure that's selected and that it's a PNG, and then go to Export All, and then just save it to the desktop as a PNG. So now you should have a Photoshop document as well as a PNG image file on your desktop. And the PNG image file is the one you're going to be submitting to Snapchat when it's time to submit your geofilter. Now in the next lesson, we're going to cover how you can digitize your geofilter using a free alternative program to Photoshop called Pixlr.